Battle of Kursk and How It Changed the World, a video essay by Nathan Mysteric. The main players: Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Third Reich, and Joseph Stalin, the leader of Soviet Russia. Operation Barbarossa was when Hitler violated his non-aggression pact with Russia. He invaded on June 22, 1941, using a tactic known as Blitzkrieg. The operation was a massive campaign spanning all across the Russian border. Blitzkrieg directly translates to lightning war. Using tanks and airplanes, the Nazis took over many countries using this fast-paced and powerful tactic developed by Erwin Rommel. While the Russians were retreating, they used a tactic known as scorched earth to make it impossible for the Germans to live off the land. This created the necessity of long supply lines, causing the Germans to be malnourished, dehydrated, and ill-equipped. This lack of necessary resources became a problem when the Soviet winter arrived. The German troops began to starve and freeze, thus weakening their army, bringing us to the small city of Kursk. Kursk is built on a sprawling plateau that is occasionally broken up by broad, shallow valleys. Almost everywhere the natural forest steppe vegetation has been replaced by farming. Before the battle, the Soviets dug in and created trench lines. These trench lines were broken up into segments. The segments were typically 12 miles long and 4 miles wide. These segments included infantry reserves, tank squads, artillery squads, infantry reserves, more infantry reserves, trench lines filled with riflemen, anti-tank squads, and automatic weapon squads, creating a almost impenetrable defense. To start, let's look at the Russians that had the home field advantage. 1.3 million men. The standard breakdown of troops were set up in battalions, groups of 1,000 men. That's 1,300 battalions. These battalions can be broken down into companies, groups of 50 to 100 men. The standard lineup of companies in the battalions were as follows: 3 riflemen companies armed with Mosin Nagants bolt-action rifles and Torakov SVT semi-automatic rifles, 1 automatic weapons company armed with an RPK light machine gun, PPSH submachine guns, and the PPD-34 submachine gun, 1 anti-tank company with 16 PTDR-41 single-shot anti-tank rifles, and the rare PTDS-41 semi-automatic anti-tank rifles, accompanied with the PPSH-44 submachine guns and bolt-action Mosin Nagants. And last but not least, 1 82mm mortar squad consisting of 4 men, 2 loaders armed with a Mauser 96 semi-automatic pistol, 1 commander armed with the same pistol, and 1 aimer with the same pistol as well. There were 3,600 Russian tanks in the Battle of Kursk. 1,200 of those tanks were T-70s. The T-70 was a Soviet-made light tank that had little armor that could only withstand a 50mm shell, which was 64% of the ammunition shot at it, 32% of the time causing mass casualties. The tank was cheap to produce but had a low-caliber gun of only 45mm, making it ineffective against German tanks, and was discontinued shortly after the Battle of Kursk. The T-34 was a Soviet-made medium tank that had adequate armor to protect itself from 45mm armor-piercing tank rounds, only letting 0.3% in, and 76mm protection from anti-tank shells, only letting in 0.2%. However, due to poor training and inadequate side armor, T-34 tank losses were extraordinarily high, had a good 76mm gun that packed a punch and could match up against the Tiger tank on the rare occasion. Overall, the T-34 was a cost-effective, solid medium tank. The Soviet air power consisted of just one type of plane, the Ilyushin Il-2. This fighter bomber was equipped with 3 23mm cannons that could shred tanks from above, KBM canisters that housed 250-pound anti-tank bombs, 4 7.62mm machine guns for infantry, and 6 rocket rails that could hold anti-tank rockets or anti-infantry. These versatile fighter bombers combined with sheer numbers were a threat in their own right. Unlike the Soviets, the Germans broke down their units into divisions, groups of 15,000 men, and brigades, groups of 4,500 men to take command of large amounts of soldiers easier, thus making the blitzkrieg tactic I mentioned earlier more efficient. The standard breakdown of troops is as follows. One pioneer battalion armed with two 8 cm Grand Norfolk 42s, 11 half-track motorized armored personnel carriers, and all personnel were armed with STG 44 assault rifles. 6 grenadier battalions armed with MG 42s, MP 40s, Panzerschrecks, Kar 98K rifles with grenade launchers, and STG 44s. 3 rifleman battalions armed with MP 40s and Gruer 43 semi automatic rifles. Although the Germans only had 997,000 troops, they had a much better structured army and much more well equipped army. The total number of German tanks was 2,500. Of this, 90 were the Elefant tank. Only 40 came back alive. They relied on their thick 100 mm armor to stop incoming rounds, but this made the tank so heavy, causing it to become a sitting duck with an artillery cannon. It didn't have any machine guns, so it was susceptible to infantry blowing it up. It couldn't move around because it was too heavy. The suspension was horrible, causing it to get stuck on any small bumps. Overall, it was just a failure of a tank. Another 150 of the 2,500 tanks were the Tiger I, a heavy tank that had 100 mm armor in the front and 60 mm on the sides. This heavily armored tank had a 76 mm high-velocity gun that could destroy T-34s in a single shot. The Tiger I also had a water-cooled engine, making it a relatively fast tank, and it had new single-wheel suspension that made the Tiger I maneuverable. The final 2,300 tanks that were in the Battle of Kursk were the Stug 3. The Stug 3 was a lightly armored tank destroyer with 50 mm armor surrounding all of it. What made the Stug viable was the literal artillery gun it had on it, a 7.5 cm long gun that was designed to fire high explosive shells, literally removing positions of defenses and tanks. The Stug had a range of up to 5,000 meters and was highly maneuverable with a top speed of 40 miles per hour. The Stug suffered from its lack of armor, though, and they were relatively easy to destroy.
Music licensing reimagined.
The superior German Messerschmitt 109s were highly maneuverable and could fly circles around the Soviets, and had 4 7.92 mm machine guns to take down enemy fighters. The Germans quickly took control of the air, but by then it was too late. Although they had won the battle in the air, they had been crippled on the ground, and 56% of their army was gone. The Germans brought in Stukas that swapped their bombs for 37 mm cannons to shred the tanks, but the Stukas were inferior and they were too slow. They were little more than target practice. With 56% of the German army dead or captured and 52% of the air force gone, the Battle of Kursk crippled the Germans, and with the US and Britain closing in on the Western Front, and the Soviets marching on Berlin with 2 million soldiers, 3,200 tanks, and 23,000 planes, the war in Europe was decided. Germany had sealed its own fate,